10 beautiful, wealthy women stood before him, offering their hands, their fortunes, and their futures. The rugged mountain man looked at them all and walked right past them. Instead, he stopped in front of the scarred, outcast laundress, shivering in the corner. When the town discovered his true reason, it changed everything. The Colorado Territory in the spring of 1878 was a place of brutal truths and beautiful lies. The town of Oakhaven, nestled in the jagged shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, was built on both. It was a boom town fueled by the newly laid tracks of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad, a place where fortunes were dug from the mud and reputations were decided by the merciless gossip of the local elite. High above Oakhaven, where the air grew thin and the pines surrendered to bare granite, lived Julian McCall. Julian was not a man of society, he was a man of the wilderness. Standing 6'3" with shoulders as broad as a yoke, he possessed a quiet, dangerous stillness. His face was weathered by sun and bliss, shadowed by a thick, dark beard, and his eyes were the color of slate before a thunderstorm. For 5 years, Julian had worked a solitary claim up on Whisper Peak. The townspeople thought him a fool, chasing ghosts in dead rock. That was until the 3rd week of April, when Julian walked into the Denver assayer's office with 3 pack mules groaning under the weight of canvas sacks. The assayer took one look at the gleaming, pure veins of gold ore, and by nightfall, the telegrams were flying. Julian McCall had struck the mother lode. Overnight, the solitary mountain man became the wealthiest bachelor in a 300-mile radius, richer than the railway tycoons and the cattle barons combined. When word reached Oakhaven that Julian was finally coming down from the mountain and that he had told Sheriff Wyatt Miller he was looking to settle down and take a wife, the town erupted into a frenzy of calculated ambition. Mayor Josiah Caldwell, a man whose greed was matched only by his political cunning, saw an opportunity. The town's coffers were running low, and securing Julian's fortune would guarantee Caldwell's reign for decades. The mayor immediately declared a grand spring gala, ostensibly to celebrate the changing of the seasons, but everyone in Oakhaven knew exactly what it was: a high-stakes auction where the prize was Julian McCall, and the bidders were the 10 most eligible, wealthy, and beautiful young women in the county. The 10 women were preened, polished, and primed by their ambitious families. Leading the pack was Beatrice Caldwell, the mayor's own daughter. Beatrice had been educated in Boston. She was striking, with porcelain skin and a ruthless intellect. She was accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted, and she wanted the mountain man's gold. Alongside her were Henrietta Briggs, heiress to a vast cattle empire, Loretta Higgins, the banker's darling, and 7 other daughters of the town's highest social echelon. They ordered silk dresses from back east, bathed in rosewater, and rehearsed their charming smiles. But Oakhaven had another resident, one who would not be attending the gala. Her name was Hannah Dempsey. At 26, Hannah was the town's pariah, an outcast completely abandoned by the society that now eagerly prepared for a festival of wealth. Hannah lived in a drafty, leaking lean-to attached to the back of the town saloon, earning her meager keep by scrubbing floors, boiling lye for soap, and washing the heavy, filth-ridden canvas trousers of the miners. 3 years prior, Hannah's life had been shattered. She had been married to Peter Caldwell, the mayor's charming but deeply selfish nephew. During a brutal winter journey through the mountain pass, their wagon had become hopelessly stuck in a blizzard. Only Hannah returned. When she crawled into town 3 days later, half dead, her body was a testament to unimaginable suffering. Severe frostbite had ravaged her right leg, leaving her with a pronounced permanent limp that made every step an agonizing effort. Her left hand and forearm were heavily scarred, a violent expanse of raised, burn-damaged tissue resulting from a desperate attempt to keep a small fire alive using the burning remains of their wagon. But her physical wounds were nothing compared to the destruction of her reputation. Peter's frozen body was found weeks later, miles from the wagon. Mayor Caldwell, refusing to believe his golden boy nephew had abandoned his wife in the snow to save his own skin, spun a vicious lie. He told the town that Hannah had hoarded their meager rations and locked Peter out of the wagon's meager shelter, forcing him out into the storm. The town, eager for a scapegoat, believed the powerful mayor. Hannah was stripped of her widow's inheritance, publicly shunned, and reduced to indentured servitude just to keep from starving. The women of Oakhaven pulled their skirts away when she limped past. The men treated her as invisible, or worse, as a target for cruel jokes. The trauma and isolation had silenced her. She rarely spoke above a whisper, keeping her scarred face hidden behind a frayed wool shawl, her eyes fixed firmly on the muddy floorboards. As the town hall was draped in patriotic bunting and filled with the scent of roasted meats and expensive perfumes for the grand gala, Hannah was out back in the freezing alley. Her scarred hand ached fiercely in the cold as she hauled heavy tin buckets of dirty water from the kitchen, her bad leg dragging through the freezing mud. She could hear the fiddle music starting up inside. It was a world she was barred from, a world that had tried to crush her into the dirt. She had no idea that the man the whole town was waiting for was about to walk right through her alleyway. The Oakhaven Town Hall was blazing with light. Crystal lanterns, brought in specifically for the occasion, cast a warm, golden glow over the polished pine floors. A string band played a lively reel in the corner, but the music felt entirely secondary to the suffocating tension in the room. The town's elite stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors at the entrance. When Julian McCall finally stepped through the threshold, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the room, so absolute that the crackle of the wood stove sounded like gunfire. He was not what they expected. Despite his staggering wealth, Julian had not purchased a tailored tuxedo or a silk cravat. He wore a pair of clean, dark trousers, a perfectly pressed but simple white cotton shirt, and a beautifully crafted leather vest. His dark hair was combed back, and his beard was neatly trimmed, revealing a strong, square jaw. But it was his eyes that unsettled the room, sharp, observing, and entirely devoid of the awe the townspeople had hoped to inspire. He moved with the quiet, predatory grace of a mountain lion, stepping into the glaring light of society without a flinch. Mayor Caldwell immediately rushed forward, his face flushed with rehearsed joviality. "Mr. McCall, welcome to Oakhaven's Grand Spring Gala. We are simply honored to host a man of your enterprise." "Mayor," Julian replied, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried to the back of the hall. He did not offer his hand. "Come, come," the mayor insisted, practically sweating with eagerness. "Allow me to introduce you to the finest flowers of our territory. The ladies have been eagerly awaiting your acquaintance." Julian was led to the center of the room, where the 10 women stood in a perfectly arranged semicircle, looking like a manicured garden of silk, lace, and pearls. Beatrice Caldwell, wearing a breathtaking gown of emerald taffeta, stepped forward first. She offered a practiced, demure smile, snapping her fan shut with a flick of her wrist. "Mr. McCall," she purred, her eyes raking over his broad chest. "It is a thrill. My father tells me of your incredible success. A man with such a vast, new estate requires a woman who understands high society. I was educated in Boston, you know. I could manage your affairs, host your associates, and ensure your wealth is respected." Julian looked at Beatrice for a long, quiet moment. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes, the sheer arrogance in her posture. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Caldwell," Julian said softly, but clearly enough for the room to hear. "But I don't need a manager for my affairs, and I certainly don't need a woman who values my gold more than the calluses on my hands. Thank you kindly, but no." Beatrice's mouth dropped open in shock. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. No one spoke to a Caldwell that way. Mayor Caldwell sputtered, stepping in quickly. Now,
Julian, let us not be hasty. Meet Henrietta Briggs. Her father owns the largest cattle spread south of Denver.
Henrietta, a tall, sturdy woman dripping in silver jewelry, stepped up with a confident smirk. Mr. McCall, with your gold and my father's beef, we could own the territory. A true partnership of power. Julian shook his head slowly. I hunt my own meat, Miss Briggs. I've got no use for a cattle empire, nor a wife who views marriage as a corporate merger. You'll have to find your power elsewhere. The crowd began to murmur in disbelief. The wealthiest man in the state was publicly discarding the most powerful women in the territory, like yesterday's news. Next came Sarah Jenkins, the remarkably beautiful daughter of the local judge. She fluttered her eyelashes, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. I only wish to be a devoted, obedient wife, Mr. McCall, to make a warm home for you. A mountain winter doesn't respect obedience, Miss Jenkins, Julian answered, his tone not cruel, but undeniably firm. It requires grit. You look like a strong wind would break you in half. I won't be responsible for bringing a fragile thing into a harsh world. No. One by one, the parade continued. One by one, Julian McCall systematically dismantled their carefully constructed facades. He rejected the banker's daughter who offered him investments. He rejected the sheriff's sister who offered him security. He rejected 10 women in the span of 20 minutes, his polite but devastating honesty leaving a trail of furious, humiliated socialites in his wake. The atmosphere in the town hall shifted from eager anticipation to a volatile, suffocating outrage. Mayor Caldwell was practically vibrating with rage, his face a deep, dangerous purple. Beatrice stood near the punch bowl, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. Is this a joke to you, McCall? Mayor Caldwell finally hissed, abandoning all pretense of hospitality. You come into my town, insult our finest families, and humiliate our daughters? If none of these women are good enough for your dirty gold, then who exactly do you think you are looking for? Julian didn't answer immediately. He turned his head, his sharp ears catching a sound that cut through the angry murmurs of the room. Clatter. Drag. Clatter. Drag. It was coming from the dark hallway that led to the kitchen. Julian turned his back on the furious mayor and the 10 stunned women. He walked slowly toward the shadows of the corridor. There, trying desperately to press herself against the wall and go unnoticed, was Hannah Dempsey. She had been tasked with bringing in fresh water for the kitchen, but the heavy iron bucket had proved too much for her exhausted body. She had dropped it, splashing freezing water over her heavy patched skirt. She stood frozen in terror as the giant of a man approached her. Her head was bowed, her scarred left hand clutching the rough wool of her shawl, pulling it tightly across her face to hide her burns. She favored her right leg, visibly trembling from the effort of standing. She looked like a trapped, beaten animal expecting a blow. Julian stopped 3 feet away from her. The entire town hall had gone deathly quiet, every neck craning to see what the mountain man was doing. "What is your name?" Julian asked. His voice had lost all the hard edges it held just moments before. It was impossibly gentle. Hannah kept her eyes glued to the water seeping into the floorboards. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken to a man in years, not unless it was to acknowledge an order. "Look at me, please," he said. Slowly, terrified of what he might do, Hannah lifted her head. The shawl slipped back a fraction, revealing the angry, ridged burn scars that crawled up the left side of her jaw and neck, a stark contrast to the pale, tragic beauty of her right profile. Her eyes, wide and haunted, met his. "Hannah," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "My name is Hannah." Julian slowly reached out. Hannah flinched instinctively, squeezing her eyes shut. But he didn't strike her. Instead, his large, calloused hands gently grasped the handle of the heavy water bucket. He lifted it, as if it weighed nothing, and set it aside. Then, he removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Miss Hannah," Julian McCall said, his voice ringing out clearly down the hallway, carrying directly into the dead-silent ballroom. "Would you do me the absolute honor of accompanying me to the altar tomorrow morning?" For 5 seconds, the world stopped spinning. Then, the town hall exploded. "Have you lost your damn mind?" Mayor Caldwell roared, storming toward the hallway. "She's a beggar, a crippled laundress. She's a murderer who left my nephew to freeze to death in the pass. She is a disgrace," Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger. "You would choose that over us?" Julian turned his head slowly. The look in his eyes was so terrifyingly cold that Caldwell stopped dead in his tracks. "The next person who speaks an ill word against this woman," Julian said, his voice a low, lethal rumble, "will answer to me. And I promise you, I don't settle debts with gold." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The townspeople shrank back, intimidated by the sheer primal authority radiating from the man. Julian turned his attention back to Hannah. She was staring at him, her chest heaving in panic. This had to be a cruel joke, a trap. Men only wanted her for hard labor, and even then, they despised her. Why would a man who could buy the world want a broken, scarred outcast? "I don't know you," Hannah whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye and tracking down her scarred cheek. "I have nothing. I am broken." "You are surviving," Julian corrected softly, "and I don't want a woman who knows how to spend a fortune. I want a woman who knows what it costs to stay alive." He extended his hand, palm up. "Say yes, Hannah. Let me take you away from this place." Hannah looked at his hand. She looked past him, into the ballroom, at the faces of the people who had spat on her, starved her, and worked her to the bone for 3 years. She looked at Mayor Caldwell's furious, hateful face. If she stayed, she would die in that alleyway. If she went with this stranger, she might die on the mountain. But looking into Julian's steady, slate-gray eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: respect. With a trembling breath, Hannah reached out her heavily scarred left hand and placed it into his. "Yes," she breathed. The wedding took place at first light the following morning under a bruised iron-gray sky. Inside the small Methodist church, the air was suffocatingly tense. Reverend Thomas rushed through the vows, his eyes darting nervously toward the back pews where Mayor Josiah Caldwell and his daughter sat, their faces radiating pure venom. Hannah stood trembling at the altar in a faded, meticulously patched calico dress, the absolute best garment she owned. Beside her, Julian McCall remained a pillar of unshakable calm. When it came time for the rings, he reached into his pocket, withdrew a thick, gleaming band of pure gold, and slid it gently onto her scarred left hand. The contrast was stark, but his touch was incredibly steady. "I pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend stammered hastily. As Julian guided Hannah down the aisle, the townspeople averted their eyes in disgust. But before reaching the heavy oak doors, the mountain man stopped. He locked eyes with Mayor Caldwell. "We are leaving Oakhaven immediately," Julian's baritone voice echoed through the silent rafters. "My wife's debts are absolved. If anyone follows us up the mountain, I will consider it a threat to my family, and I will end it." Outside, in the biting wind, 2 horses waited, a massive black stallion and a sturdy roan mare. Hannah looked at the mare with a spike of deep panic. Her ruined leg made riding astride an agonizing, near impossible ordeal. But as she limped closer, she noticed the rig. It wasn't a standard Western saddle. It was a custom-built side saddle, heavily padded with thick, cured sheepskin on the right side, designed specifically to cradle a damaged leg. Hannah stared at it, her breath catching. He hadn't just bought this. He had prepared it entirely for her. Without a word, Julian placed his large hands on her waist and effortlessly lifted her into the saddle. The relief on her injured limb was immediate. Before she could process the gesture, he reached over the saddle horn and draped a heavy, dark blue woolen coat over her shivering shoulders. The collar was lined with thick fur, the front adorned with polished brass buttons. It was a fortune in fabric. "The mountain air is unforgiving," Julian said simply, swinging onto his stallion. "Keep it buttoned." The grueling ride up Whisper Peak took 2 days, winding through dense ponderosa pines and steep granite inclines. Through it all, Julian's attention never wavered from her safety. When they camped, he didn't demand she cook or fetch water. He built the fire, erected a heavy canvas tent exclusively for her privacy, and served her hot coffee and beans before eating his own. He slept outside in the freezing dirt so she could feel secure. Hannah lay awake, clutching the wool coat, her mind spinning in terrified confusion. Men like her late husband, Peter Caldwell, had been cruel and cowardly. The men of Oakhaven viewed her as a beast of burden. Why did this immensely wealthy, dangerous stranger treat her as if she were made of spun glass? "He is building a trap," her traumatized mind whispered. "When we are truly isolated, the monster will reveal himself." Late on the second afternoon, they broke through the timberline. Nestled in a sheltered valley beneath a massive granite bluff sat Julian's home. Hannah gasped. She had braced herself for a squalid, dirt-floored miner's shack smelling of grease. Instead, a magnificent 2-story log fortress stood before them. It featured masterfully joined timber, wide glass windows catching the amber sunset, and a stone chimney puffing fragrant cedar smoke. Julian helped her down, supporting her weight as they stepped onto the wide porch. Inside, the cabin took her breath away. Thick Navajo rugs covered the polished floors, leather-bound books lined the walls, and a massive iron stove radiated deep, comforting heat. It was impeccably clean and profoundly peaceful. "This is your home now, Hannah," Julian said quietly, hanging his hat on a peg. "The ground-floor bedroom is yours, so you won't have to navigate the stairs." Hannah stood in the center of the beautiful room, trembling violently. The sheer disparity between her brutal reality 48 hours ago and this peaceful sanctuary shattered her fragile composure. The tension finally snapped. "Why?" she croaked, spinning to face him, hot tears spilling over her scarred cheeks. "Why me? You could have had the mayor's daughter. You could have had a queen. I am crippled. I am ugly. The whole town knows I murdered my husband in the snow. I have nothing to give you. What do you want from me?" Julian stood perfectly still, letting her pour out 3 years of pent-up terror. He didn't step closer, ensuring she didn't feel cornered. "I know exactly what Oakhaven thinks of you, Hannah," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And I know exactly what kind of men they revere. They think Peter Caldwell was a saint, a martyr who died because of a cruel, selfish wife." Hannah flinched. The memory of Peter violently ripping their meager blankets away in the freezing wagon flashed through her mind like a physical blow. Julian walked to the massive stone fireplace and reached up to the wooden mantel. He retrieved a small, intricately carved cedar box and walked back, holding it out to her. "Open it," he instructed gently. Hannah's badly burned left hand shook as she unlatched the tiny brass clasp. She flipped the lid open, and the breath was instantly punched out of her lungs. Lying on a bed of faded velvet was a tarnished, slightly dented silver locket. It was unmistakably hers. Peter had violently torn it from her neck the night he abandoned her in the blizzard, screaming that he needed something to barter for his own survival. She had never seen it again. She looked up at Julian, her eyes wide with absolute shock and rising panic. How do you have this?" she whispered. "Because," Julian said, his jaw tightening, his slate-gray eyes darkening with the memory of a profound tragedy. "I was the one who found Peter Caldwell in the snow 3 years ago." The silver locket rested heavily in Hannah's scarred palm. The firelight flickered across its tarnished surface, illuminating the small engraved C on the front. She traced the letter with a trembling thumb, her breath catching in her throat as the ghosts of her past rushed into the quiet warmth of the cabin. "I don't understand," Hannah whispered, her voice fracturing. They told me he wandered off looking for help. They said he died a hero, trying to save us." Julian pulled a heavy wooden chair from the dining table and sat facing her, his massive frame leaning forward, his slate-gray eyes locked onto hers with unflinching honesty. "3 years ago, I was running a trap line up near Dead Man's Pass," Julian began, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to anchor her to the floorboards. It was the tail end of that blizzard. The snow was piled 10 feet high in the drifts. I found him huddled in a rock crevice about 5 miles from where your wagon was recovered. He wasn't dead when I found him, Hannah. He was delirious, frostbitten and dying, but still talking. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. She squeezed her eyes shut, terrified of what she was about to hear, yet desperate for the truth that had been denied to her for so long. "A dying man in the wilderness doesn't lie to the Almighty, and he doesn't lie to the man trying to pull him out of the ice," Julian continued softly. "Peter Caldwell boasted to me. He thought I was a hallucination, an angel maybe, sent to validate his cowardice. He told me he took the only heavy wool blanket. He told me he ripped that locket from your neck because he thought he could trade the silver for a hot meal if he found a mining camp. And he told me that he locked the wagon from the outside, wedging a branch in the handle so you couldn't follow him and slow him down." A ragged, agonizing sob tore from Hannah's throat. Her knees buckled, but Julian was there instantly. He caught her by the shoulders, his grip firm and incredibly gentle, lowering her carefully onto the edge of the hearth. "He left you to die so he could move faster," Julian said, his voice hardening with a cold, righteous anger. "I tried to get him down the mountain, but his heart gave out an hour later. Before I buried him under the cairn, I searched his coat. I found your locket, but I also found something else, something wrapped in oilcloth that he had been protecting more fiercely than his own life." Julian reached into his leather vest and pulled out a small, worn leather ledger. "Peter Caldwell was Mayor Josiah's bagman," Julian stated, tapping the book. "This ledger contains every forged signature, every bribed official, and every stolen dollar from the federal railway subsidies that built Oakhaven. Josiah Caldwell didn't just hate you because you survived, Hannah. He hated you because he was terrified Peter might have given this ledger to you before he died. He ruined your reputation and kept you in the dirt so no one would ever believe a word you said." Hannah stared at the little book, the magnitude of the betrayal washing over her. Her entire life had been destroyed, her body scarred, her dignity stripped away, all to protect the wealth of a corrupt politician. "When I came down from the mountain to buy supplies a year ago, I saw you," Julian confessed, his tone softening dramatically. He knelt before her on the Navajo rug, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I watched you haul boiling water with a crippled leg. I watched the women spit at your feet, and I watched you square your shoulders and keep walking. I saw a woman forged in iron, Hannah, the strongest creature I had ever laid eyes on." "The gold," Hannah breathed, wiping her face with her unscarred hand. "The strike you made." "A trap," Julian smiled, a dangerous, wolfish grin. "A man with gold can buy the attention of the devil himself. I needed Josiah Caldwell to open his doors to me, to show his true colors to the territory. I needed to destroy him. But most importantly, I needed an excuse to pull you out of that alleyway without getting you killed in the crossfire." Hannah looked at the giant mountain man kneeling before her. For 3 years she had believed she was utterly worthless, a broken thing meant to be discarded. Now, looking into Julian's eyes, she saw total reverence. "You are not broken, Hannah," Julian whispered, reaching out to gently touch the scarred, ridged skin of her left cheek. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "You are a survivor, and I would be honored if you would truly be my wife." Down in the valley, the walls of Oakhaven were collapsing. Inside the mayor's office, Jonas Cobb, the Pinkerton agent, stood reading the telegram that had just arrived from Denver. Mayor Josiah Caldwell and his daughter Beatrice watched him, their faces pale with anxiety. "Read it, Cobb," the mayor barked, slamming his fist on the desk. "Who is he? Some bandit from the border territories?" Jonas Cobb slowly folded the yellow paper. His hand hovered over the butt of the Colt revolver, holstered at his hip. "The wire is from United States District Judge Moses Hallett, Mayor," Cobb said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It seems your Julian McCall isn't a prospector at all." "Then who is he?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill. "He is United States Deputy Marshal Julian McCall," Cobb replied, stepping away from the door to block their exit. "He was dispatched by the Department of the Interior. The gold he brought to the assayer's office didn't come from Whisper Peak. It was stamped bullion from the Denver Mint, provided by the federal government as bait. He's been building a federal RICO and embezzlement case against you for 2 years, Josiah. And as of this wire, my contract with Oakhaven is terminated. I have been deputized to assist in your arrest." Mayor Caldwell's face drained of all color. The room spun. The railroad money. The bribes. If McCall was a federal marshal, he had the authority to hang him. "No," Caldwell gasped, a feral panic taking over his eyes. He lunged for the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out a hidden derringer. He aimed it squarely at Cobb. "Drop the belt, Pinkerton, now." Cobb, caught off guard by the desperate move, slowly unbuckled his gun belt, letting it hit the floor. "Father, what are you doing?" Beatrice shrieked, backing against the wall. "Saving our empire," Caldwell snarled. He turned to Sheriff Wyatt Miller, who had been standing silently in the corner. "Wyatt, gather your deputies. We are riding up Whisper Peak tonight. We tell the town McCall stole the town's railway funds and kidnapped that crippled laundress to cover his tracks. We kill them both, burn the cabin, and take the gold." "Josiah, that's murder of a federal officer," Sheriff Miller stammered, his face slick with sweat. "It's survival," Caldwell roared. "Saddle the horses." The moon was a sharp sliver of ice in the black sky when the posse of 12 men, led by Mayor Caldwell and Sheriff Miller, reached the timberline of Whisper Peak. The wind howled through the pines, biting through their heavy coats. As they rode into the clearing before Julian's cabin, Caldwell raised his hand, halting the men. The cabin was dark, quiet, too quiet. "Spread out," Caldwell hissed to the deputies. "Burn the barn first, flush them out." Before a single man could strike a match, the heavy oak door of the cabin swung open. The light from a dozen kerosene lanterns spilled out onto the porch, blinding the riders. Stepping into the light was Julian McCall. He wasn't wearing his leather vest or canvas trousers. He was dressed in the dark, immaculate uniform of a United States Deputy Marshal, a silver star gleaming brilliantly on his chest. In his hands, he held a lever-action Winchester rifle resting casually across his arms. But it was the woman stepping out beside him that made the mayor's blood run cold. Hannah stood tall, bathed in the golden light. She was dressed in a stunning, deep, crimson velvet gown, a dress Julian had secretly ordered from Denver months ago. Her hair was pinned up elegantly, and she wore her mother's silver locket proudly over her chest. The heavy wool shawl that usually hid her face was gone. She stood beside her husband, her chin raised, looking down at the men who had tormented her with a gaze of absolute, unyielding defiance. "Josiah Caldwell." Julian's voice boomed across the clearing, echoing off the granite cliffs like a thunderclap. "You are trespassing on federal land, and you are under arrest for the embezzlement of United States funds, the bribery of a federal railway surveyor, and the conspiracy to commit murder." Caldwell sneered, leveling his revolver at Julian's chest. "You're one man, Marshal. I have 12 guns backing me. You're going to die up here, just like that worthless nephew of mine, and I'm going to throw your crippled whore of a wife off the cliff myself." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his rifle. He simply smiled. "I'm not one man, Josiah," Julian said softly. "I just like the quiet." From the dark tree line surrounding the clearing, the sharp, metallic clack-clack of 24 rifles being cocked shattered the silence. Caldwell spun around. Emerging from the shadows were 20 heavily armed men. Leading them was Jonas Cobb, holding his reclaimed Colt, riding alongside a detachment of the Colorado State Militia. "Federal warrants, Mayor!" Cobb shouted over the howling wind. "Issued directly by Judge Hallett. The assayer in town wired the telegraph operator the moment you left. You walked right into the trap." Sheriff Miller, seeing the rifles aimed at his chest, immediately dropped his gun into the snow and raised his hands. "I surrender. I was following orders, Marshal." One by one, the posse threw down their weapons. The fight drained out of them in seconds. Mayor Caldwell stood alone, his hand trembling as he held his revolver, darting his eyes frantically for an escape that didn't exist. "It's over, Josiah," Hannah spoke. Her voice wasn't the broken whisper the town was used to. It was clear, strong, and rang with righteous authority. "Your lies couldn't bury me, and your money can't save you." Caldwell let out a furious, animalistic cry and raised his gun toward Hannah. Before his finger could even brush the trigger, Julian moved with blinding speed. The Winchester cracked, a single shot tearing through the frigid air. The bullet shattered Caldwell's right shoulder. The mayor screamed, dropping the weapon as the militia swarmed him, dragging him face first into the freezing snow. Hannah didn't flinch at the gunshot. She simply reached out and placed her scarred hand over Julian's strong, calloused one. He lowered the rifle, turning to look at her, the lethal coldness in his eyes melting away instantly into profound warmth. By morning, the town of Oak Haven was forever changed. Mayor Caldwell, Beatrice, and Sheriff Miller were loaded into a reinforced prison wagon, heavily guarded by the militia, bound for the federal penitentiary in Denver. The elite families who had mocked Hannah found their assets frozen by federal decree, their reputations in ruins. Up on Whisper Peak, as the first rays of the morning sun painted the snow-capped mountains in hues of gold and violet, Julian and Hannah sat on the porch of their cabin. Hannah leaned her head against his broad shoulder, wrapped in the heavy brass-buttoned coat he had bought her. She sipped hot coffee, feeling the warmth spread through a body that had been cold for 3 long years. "The town will need a new mayor," Julian noted, taking her hand and brushing his thumb over the gold wedding band that sat beside her scars. "A new council, honest folks this time. They will manage." Hannah smiled softly, watching a pair of eagles circle high above the valley. She pulled him a little closer, breathing in the scent of pine and safety. "We have a mountain to look after." He had rejected the 10 most desired women in the territory because he didn't want a woman who only knew how to wear a crown. He wanted a queen who knew how to forge one out of iron. And looking at Hannah, Julian knew he was the richest man in the world. Did this gripping tale of mountain justice and undeniable romance keep you on the edge of your seat? Hannah's powerful resilience and Julian's unwavering loyalty prove that true worth isn't found in gold or high society, but in the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. If you loved watching the corrupt mayor get his reckoning and Hannah claim her rightful crown, smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling Western dramas.
Hi, my name is Ensley Rowland, the owner and manager of Air Encounters. After watching the video, he rejected 10 women and chose the one nobody wanted. Then the town found out why. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the feeling of quiet respect. The story reminds us that first impressions and public opinions don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes the qualities that matter most are the ones people overlook, and it takes someone willing to look deeper to recognize them. I think one gentle lesson here is that real value often has very little to do with appearances or popularity. Taking the time to understand someone's character can completely change the way we see them. In everyday life, we all have opportunities to look beyond assumptions and treat people with more understanding. What do you think made the mountain man see something others missed? And which moment in the story stood out to you the most? Thanks for spending time with Air Encounters. If this story meant something to you, Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe like or subscribe for more stories like this.